even people who are at very high levels in their career, even people who seem to the rest of us to be really, really accomplished and very skilled and very technical in how they present and where they pause and how they look at the slides and how they refer to things and all this, that, and the other. They didn't just poof turn out that way 5 minutes before they worked on stage. Right before they came onto stage. It comes from practice and rehearsal and technique, but it also comes from a sense of self-belief.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Maderos.
And I'm Colleen Hungerford, and this is We're Doing This Right, right? Podcast for the whole woman, mind, body, soul, and business.
It's humor infused, as real as it gets, inspiring, and you'll walk away with real usable tools for life and business.
If you love what you're hearing, please share with a friend, subscribe so you'll never miss an episode, and rate and review whenever you listen.
So find your earbuds, lace up your walking shoes, or cozy up with a beverage of your choice. It's time to dig in.
Long time no see, friends.
I
Missed
know.
you.
It's been like a billion years, I feel like. I'm like, who's this blonde lady that I'm talking to? I barely even remember you. But that's not true. You've had a lot going on, lots and lots.
Doing that thing adults do where I say, like, oh, after this week, things will slow down and be normal again. So fingers crossed. Well, I'm home now. I'm excited. One more vacation. Well, actually, one vacation. I've not yet taken a vacation, but there's a vacation
Right.
coming, and then
Right.
life gets better. We're not
Okay.
alone. We have a friend
No, we're
here,
not.
and I'd like to tell you about my friend Julie Campbell. Julie was I first was introduced to Julie on Sky Michael's Happier Human program, and I was like, gotta have her. I'm pretty sure I emailed her before the session was even over. I'm like, Julie, must have on podcast. Please come.
Uh,
So let me tell you guys about Julie Campbell. Julie has spent decades as an off-Broadway film, TV, voiceover actor, and storyteller. And now she helps leaders, experts, and students use those same storytelling and acting tools to ditch the fear so they can speak courageously and concisely in any setting. What many don't know is Julie grew up in a world of physical and emotional abuse where her voice was dismissed, ridiculed, and silenced. That experience shapes what she does now as a CEO and confidence whisperer at Center Stage Connections to help you reframe the stories that hold you back, shape the stories that move you forward, and step fully into the work and life you imagine. Through her Talk and Be You method, not therapy, but very deeply therapeutic, Julie guides others to connect the dots between who they are and how they show up and what they say and how they say it in keynotes, in meetings, and in life. Welcome, Julie.
Wow. That's amazing, Julie. Holy cannoli.
oh,
Mic
well,
drop.
Yeah.
okay, we're done.
Yeah, seriously. Like,
Yeah,
okay.
Oh,
no,
thanks,
stop.
thanks for being here. How can
Yeah,
people
thanks.
connect with you?
Julie, we were chatting just briefly before. That bios or in that intro is pretty phenomenal. I am really interested about a couple things in there that stood out to me, and I would love for you to speak on those things. And I love this idea of a confidence whisperer. Like, I made me think of like a somebody kind of just like I don't want to say like a Jiminy Cricket because that's not what I'm talking about, but you know what I mean? Like somebody who's there behind you, like in giving you confidence and helping you with those things. But then I also was very interested in this, in your experience of like kind of having this trauma or this abuse or whatever that happened early on and how that affects you as into speech, into how you're delivering yourself, how you're presenting yourself, how you're communicating. I say a lot, I came from a really loud family. Like I came from, they're Greek and Italian, and there's a lot of talking, and so I was very, very quiet, which nobody believes, until about high school, right? Because I never had to say anything. So when you say this, I relate to that so much. So I would love for you to tell us more about you and more about everything that you're doing, because I have not heard you speak. I was not on Happier Human. So I would love for you to share all of that with all the rest of us.
Sure. Thanks for the lovely introduction and welcome. Yeah, so I'll start with the confidence whisperer. So I did not give that name to myself.
Ooh.
I've talked with a few business strategists, and like any other business person, I work with a lot of other specialists who do the things that I need help with. And this, her name is actually, I'll do a shout out. Her name is Beth Nidick. She's a fabulous person who kind of teaches you how to do the podcast thing. And when I was talking to her, and she said, just tell me what you do. And I got through like my 1 minute thing, and she said, well, you should just call yourself the confidence whisperer. And I
Love
went,
it.
well, okay, I will. And ever since I have used that, and I've been in different networking groups and all of that, it totally makes sense to people. Because what I do, and as Cheryl mentioned in my intro, I work with CEOs, COOs, CFOs, all the way to students and groups of new hires who are trying to kind of get together on their messaging if they have to speak to senior leadership and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not always people who are skilled necessarily in and practiced in how they speak. It's people who have to speak in front of others for what they do and how they do it. It's part of what you have to do. We have to have conversations. So that's how I work with people in those different ways. And what's true, though, and that I have learned, and why I call myself and why the confidence whisperer works, is that even people who are at very high levels in their career, even people who seem to the rest of us to be really, really accomplished and very skilled and very technical in how they present and where they pause and how they look at the slides and how they refer to things and all this, that, and the other. They didn't just poof turn out that way 5 minutes before they worked on stage. Right before they came onto stage. It comes from practice and rehearsal and technique, but it also comes from a sense of self-belief
Mm-hmm.
that and each of those people too, when I talk about those kind of more accomplished people, you should know that just because people seem to be at a high place in their career doesn't mean that they don't feel like they are coming into high stakes moments. My high stakes moments may not be your high stakes moment, right? A CEO who is doing a gala address where they are trying to raise millions of dollars, or a senior director who is leading a town hall where there's in their theater, there are cameras in the room and there are multiple people all over the world logging in, who comes to me and says, okay, here's the deal. I'm really good at leading my team and speaking in a conference room. But when my boss asked me to do this, I was ready to throw up.
Oh
It's not
God.
my thing. Can you help me? So I said, yeah. So that self belief thing is the first place that we start with that, because you really can't get to what you're saying and how you're saying it if there's this thing inside you that is, I like to call it an inner critic, that is
Mm.
kind of telling you all the things you're doing wrong or all the infinite ways you're going to completely screw up this opportunity, right? And we all have
Yeah.
those voices and we
Yep.
all
Yep.
have those things in our head. Well, to go to a little go to answer your second question kind of about my background and growing up
Yeah.
with domestic violence and physical and emotional abuse, we'll just kind of get into that,
Yeah.
that those that world that teaches you certain things.
Mm-hmm.
For me, my biggest takeaways from that was that I didn't want to make a mistake. I had to do
Mm-hmm.
everything right. I had to say things right. I had to make sure that I was backing up whatever my position was. And also just not to trust people,
Yeah.
because how I grew up, that world was not to be shared with people outside of our home. Even though people knew and neighbors knew, and there were police cars that would come to our house at night, and we would sometimes have to leave the house and those sorts of things. And I'll tell you a story in just a second. But even though there were, you weren't supposed to talk about it, what
Right.
happened outside the home. So, in one example of that is, and I shared one of these on the Happier Human that Cheryl was referring to, and I'll share another story with you, because part of why I do this is that when people work with me, what I say is, this is not therapy. I am not a licensed therapist. I have been through a lot of therapy, but what I do though is very therapeutic,
Mm.
because I get people talking, just talk about the stories that you feel are kind of still in your head that are holding you back. And let's reframe those. Let's reframe those. And let's also consider the stories that bring you joy and bring you to the place where you feel the best of who you are. Okay, so back to what I was saying. So, one moment
Mm-hmm.
from that's very big in my head, and I've actually spoken publicly about this, was when I was probably around 10 years old or so. My parents had gone out to a very late night cocktail dinner party for my dad's business. And this was on probably a Friday night or Saturday night. That morning, my dad came in and woke us up very, very early and told us that we needed to come into their bedroom. And we went into their bedroom, and my brothers and I stood. He asked us to stand back against the wall, and my mother was lying in the bed. They had a giant king size bed. She was still in the dress that she wore the night before, and her eyes were black and blue. Her nose was looked pretty out of joint, and it was still looked like it might have been bleeding. She also had blood on her dress. So my dad said to us, we were in a car accident last night, and your mom's face is that way because she hit the dashboard when we had the accident. I knew that what he was saying wasn't true. We had this was a recurring thing in our house. I mean, this was pretty bad event, but
Yeah.
seeing my mom battered and bruised was not a new thing. And I asked him if I could go see what happened to the car. And he knew that I was calling him out on it. That was the thing that why my dad and I didn't get along was
Yeah.
because I called him on those things. I knew what the truth was, and he didn't want to admit that. So when I asked him that, my mom, who was lying in this gigantic bed, shared a look with me that is still with me today. She looked me in the eye and she just nodded her head ever so slightly so that only she and I could see that. My dad wasn't in her line of sight. And in that look, what she shared with me was stop talking.
Yeah.
You're going to make this situation worse. Just stop. And so I did.
Yeah.
I chose in that moment not to speak up because I didn't want to make the situation worse.
Right. In her own way, she was probably she was protecting you for sure, right?
Projecting.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the reason I share that story is because, yes, to your point, now as an adult,
Yeah. Right.
that's exactly, I mean, I have three young children. Let me preface it too by saying I have a wonderful husband, a fabulous marriage, and three wonderfully healthy, bright lights that are melting out in the world.
Right. Wonderful.
So I didn't continue that cycle. I'll be very clear about that. But at the time, so one of the things that I when in my work when I'm working with people is we use the phrase what I felt then as a child, what I know now as an adult is da 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 da.
Yeah.
So what I felt then as a child was that I needed to be quiet, that my voice didn't matter, that I was being dismissed. And that's one example. The verbal abuse was, in my mind, was frankly quite a bit worse with the things that were said and diminished. And you're not, why do you need to go to college? And,
Yep.
all kinds of, I won't even say the words that I was called publicly by my dad. What I know now as an adult is none of that had anything to do with me.
But that feels
That's a
very
them.
differently, right? As a 10-year-old.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So you have to those things that's my one example of the thing and those and that held me back for so long because it would I would hesitate or even when it happens on much more rare occasions, but there are times when I do walk into a real room or a virtual room and for whatever reason I feel my heart start to race a little bit or I'll feel my breath kind of quicken or I'll feel that I'm up here rather than really focusing on my breath and all of those years of breathing exercises that I've done through my acting training. And it's not always because I'm thinking about those things, but the neuroscience behind that is that we do have to rewire our brains so that we say, okay, you're going into this Zoom call, or you're walking into this room of 250 or 300 people, and they all are here to hear you. They're here, they want to hear what you have to say. Let's make this a conversation and take all of that magic and that energy and that craziness that I mean, I had like crazy flying red hair and lots of freckles, still got a little bit of freckles, but I had a lot of energy and people thought it was really funny and all this other stuff. So anyway, my point is that you take those things with you and you flip the script or you reshape it and you say, okay, that 10-year-old who was told that there's lots more going on there. I'm going to take
Yeah.
that 10-year-old who knows what she can do and how amazing she is and how fun she is. And you're coming with me. Let's go have this conversation.
I love
I
that.
love the idea of giving the positive memories and stories the attention as well, because I think it's very,
Yes.
very easy for all of us to fixate on the negative and the things that went wrong. They're just louder, and it's our body's way of protecting us because we don't want those
Hmm.
things to repeat. So that's
Yep.
why that's on the forefront. But and I love reframing. I spent all of my 20s in therapy learning to reframe, and it's just a habit that I have now. But I don't think that I necessarily always go back and pull on the positive memories in the way that you've described. And that's really an
Hmm.
interesting perspective. Also, just
I
Yeah.
very sorry for the trauma you went through. And that
Yeah,
trauma is probably
absolutely.
what made you so funny.
Oh my
Well,
god.
Because, oh God.
yeah. I mean, you do kind of find a way to get beyond it with humor. I don't know. My kids don't always think I'm very funny, but anyway, that's okay.
But that's a
That
kid
again
thing.
is a them problem,
That's a
not a you
them
problem.
problem.
There you go. But it's funny that you say that because I had a client who, when we were saying like let's get to let's talk about, she was having a hard time kind of getting back to, and this is also with women, as I'm going to say women of a certain age, or once we get like into our 40s or into our 50s, and our kids are getting older, but we might also be caring for our parents, or maybe we've lost a parent, so we're caught in this thing of wanting to recapture the joy that we had, and also recognizing that there are hard things that we're doing in
Yeah.
relationships and all of that. And it took her a while, but she finally shared with me. I said, just tell me about a time when you felt really at your best, when you just felt free and you could really truly be who you are. And those are usually between like the ages of maybe like 6 and 12, maybe a little younger now because kids are growing up so fast with everything. But she told me this lovely story about how her grandparents had a horse farm, and they would go spend the summers there, and they would ride on their horses. Like, they spent all day riding on the horses, taking care of the horses. And then I said, just tell me more, tell me more. And so she started to talk about that it was not too hot, that it was in this beautiful part of the country where it never got too hot in the summer. And she just remember feeling the wind through her hair and just feeling completely free and completely herself. And kind of after we talked about that, because where she was getting to was she was wanting to become more comfortable on camera. She needed to promote her business more on Instagram.
Okay.
She said, I just feel so awkward and I'm so self-conscious and all of that. So we talked about that, and it completely shifted for her. And she said to me, I'm pretty sure we just connected the dots here. And I said, yeah, I think we did.
Awesome, mate. Oh my god,
So that's,
amazing.
yeah, it's such a cool, I mean, I feel so lucky to do what I do because it really truly is taking all of that stuff, I mean, I don't bring my personal life into that, but you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
taking those
Yeah.
experiences, that's a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
And then the how part of it, of what do you do? Where do you look? Where do you pause? How do you get
Yeah.
rid of a monotone thing if you've got a monotone thing going on?
I love that you shared that because that particular story gives you such a visual of what it feels like to feel joy and to feel calm
Mm.
and to be able to take that into whatever the next thing that you're doing. And I really love when you mentioned like we're going to acknowledge that like back then that was shit for lack of a better term. But now this, right? Like because I think
Mhm.
sometimes what can happen with some people when they try to reframe, they're just always like we'll try to find the positive in this bad thing that happened. And it's like sometimes that thing
Mm.
was just shit. Like sometimes that thing was just bad and we don't have to try to pretend that there's some lesson there, but we can acknowledge, okay, that was that time and that's how you felt about it. And now in this time you feel about this way. So I just wanted to mention that I think that that's really cool that you acknowledge that for people because it's really allowing them to like feel those feelings that happened to them, but then also be kind of in the present with what that is now. But I want to
100%.
know, yeah, I want to know like, oh, man, so if Cheryl and I were like, hey, we want to do a TED Talk. That's a goal Cheryl and I both have, right? We were like, we would love to do a TED Talk. Like, how does that process work with you and what you do and how you coach or teach? Like, I'm just so interested in the process if you're willing to share some of that with us.
Sure, absolutely. I do work with people on those big, keynote addresses and guest speaker events and all of that where you are the only one or two people on stage. And I absolutely love it. It is an opportunity for you to share your story. So
Yeah.
how does that happen? We have kind of three things we start to look at. So if, I've already kind of talked about a little bit about what I do with the is there anything holding you back part. So we kind
Yeah.
of get through that part of it. And then one of the other chunks of that is the content part. And that content is connected to who your audience is. And you know that as business people, this whole like, who's your ideal client? Who's your all that other stuff? But not so much not quite as much. But you do need to know who you're speaking to. And with those larger talks, it's generally a broader audience. But you do want to have, some people call it the audience avatar. I like to think of them as real people that you are speaking to. So that is your content wants to get connected to that, because in every time that you go to speak, you want to consider who your audience is. So for example, in this conversation, you're my audience, but your audience is also my audience,
Right.
right? So those sorts of things. So we have exercises that we do to really break down and get super clear, almost like thinking of your audience as another character in the play. That the techniques and the tools and the strategies that I use are very stage inspired. So I really help people create their audience as if it's another character. And I say that without it making it sound like it sounds really kooky, but it really does help you kind of get into the shoes of your audience. So that's part of it. And what I help with the content is very, very often, if not always, when we are speaking at an event or when we're speaking about what we do and how we do it, we think that everything we say is important. And we want the audience to know everything. And I can't leave this out. I have to put this in there. So often what happens with these talks, and I did have a client who had hired me, who had, I want to get this right. She came to me on a Friday and her talk was on a Monday. Sorry, she came in on a Thursday, her talk was on a Monday. She had 12 minutes of material. It wasn't for a TED talk. She had 12 minutes of material and she had to get it down to 6 minutes. They were going to cut her off at 6 minutes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But let me tell you, this happens to me all the time. And here's what we do, because I don't pretend to create I'm not a content creator. There are people out there who are brilliant at that. I don't write your story, I help with shaping it. So I can take a piece of content and I can give you very clear suggestions on how to start it. You want to start with a sticky moment. Remember how I was talking about who's the audience you're talking to and what are you delivering? You want to connect in that first sentence there why they're in the room, what do they want from this? Why are they going to sit there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and what you're going to deliver. So you get that into one sentence. That's your one sentence objective. And then everything else you say and do, because we're on stage, we're doing things, moves towards that objective. And I help you keep on the rails with your content.
Okay.
It doesn't happen like that. In that particular instance, it did happen for my client. She was actually in a competition for it was kind of a Shark Tank sort of thing for her business, and the stakes were very high. She was wanting the prize was a six figure prize,
Oh wow.
completely transforming her business. And she was in the last round of it. There were four people left. It was for a live event, and end of the story is they won the money.
Amazing.
Yay, good job.
Yeah, yeah. So I had to say that anyway.
Obviously,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay, so that's part of the content part of it. And then the other thing we do is we work on the how. For instance, where are those moments where you need to pause? I like to call it letting something land. One of the mistakes that a lot of us make when we're talking is we've been rehearsing it a lot, like a whole lot. When you're on an off-Broadway or Broadway show, you've been in rehearsals for like usually about 2 months. You've usually had a period of previews that we call it, where invited audiences come, and then you open. And then once you open, you're sometimes doing 6 to 8 performances a week. But the audience is different every time. And the audience paid some money to come and see you, and it's the first time they're experiencing it. So, as an actor, as a speaker, as a storyteller, as a presenter, you have to come into that room with all of the presence and the authenticity and the focus and the energy as if you're doing it for the first time. That's what I help people get to. Nobody wants to, we call it in the stage, we call it phoning it in,
Right.
where you go to a show and it's clearly that the actors are a little tired of doing the show. Not, I'm not, and that's a rare thing. That doesn't happen all the time, for sure. But you can kind of tell when things get a little tired, and that's not fair to the audience. They paid the same price that the people paid, when the show opened a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, a month ago. So that's part of what we do. So how do you do that? And part of that happens with when I talk about letting something land, that when we're speaking and when we've practiced it, when we've rehearsed it, where's that moment where the audience's imagination needs to catch up with where you are? Like I just did.
It kind of
That's part of
feels
it.
like this is a good time. So we always ask our guests, like, what are you passionate about right now? And one of the things that you mentioned was speaking with intention and listening to understand. And kind of the example you're giving almost to me feels like as a presenter, you're going in and you are kind of listening to your audience to
Mm,
understand and meet them where they are. That's kind of what that's connecting, but also just in general, I'd love to hear tips on becoming active listeners that are truly there to understand what's happening with the people that you're with.
I love that. That was a great synopsis. Thank you, Cheryl. So, conversations are being and listening. And one of the examples I like to use is the smartest, most interesting people that I know. And you might have found someone of like, I'll give you this description at a cocktail party or a networking event, someone who you know is very accomplished. And you start talking to them, and they don't want to talk about themselves. They want to hear about you. So they ask good questions, they ask insightful questions that get you talking about you. And it's not any kind of performative thing that they're doing. It's just that they know when you know who you are and you can sit in that place of presence and authenticity, you don't have to prove anything to
Right.
anyone.
Right.
And really, the most wonderful conversations, if you think about someone who may have done that for you at some point, the most curious people out there are also the best listeners,
Yeah.
right? And so, how do we actively listen? Not just by asking good questions. It can be, I'll give you something really specific because this often gets when I'm working with leadership teams, or you're working with kind of senior leadership and new hires, and there's some disconnect, or there's partners and there's new teams and what have you, is by asking those questions. But also, if you're in a place where you are with someone who's more senior than you, and you're a little bit nervous or something like that, that you can ask for some clarification. So this is what I heard you say, do I have that right? And that's a great tool with your children and teens and young adults and any relationships that you care about too,
Hmm.
right? When someone says
Yeah.
something, to say, this is what I heard, do I have that right? And you come to that conversation without an agenda
Yeah.
necessarily. So yes, speak with intention, but listen to understand, to let go of however you thought this was going to go, and ask if you're getting it right, because ultimately that connection that happens only happens when both people feel fully present, fully engaged, safe, all those different words we can use, where people feel like they can truly be who they are.
I'm thinking about this in a like tangible way of putting this into my business. So I do a lot of new client intakes where the
Mhm.
goal is to help that person feel know, like, and trust me so that they want to work with me. And the most impactful way to do that, I believe, truly is for that person to leave and feel understood. Like you really did. So those clarifying questions and like really making it about that person in those client intakes. Like it's so easy for me to walk into a new buyer meeting and educate and tell you all the ways that I'm going to be the best buyer representation for you. And that's important that they trust my process, but I think what's more important is that they just trust me as an individual more than like selling my actual skill in the process that I'm going to take them through. They just need to know that at every step of the way, I'm going to listen to understand them, and they leave each moment feeling like, oh, she gets it. Hmm,
Absolutely.
thanks.
Absolutely. And that works with, as I already mentioned, the family relationships. You can also think about any like physicians, nurses, dentists, lawyers, any teachers, professors that come into a room and say, okay, so what's going on? They may already know what's going on paper,
Yeah.
but so
Right.
tell me what's happening. And absolutely, no like and trust, right? And that doesn't happen by any of us saying, "Oh, let me tell you about my amazing list of accomplishments here and why I am the confidence whisperer." But also, I'll couch that with why you would never want to pay me to sing. I'll give you a little humility there. That's not my thing. Anyway, but no, to be that those skills, speaking with intention, listening to understand, and always start off with listening. That's why I was saying from the very beginning of this that before you ever shape your content, whether it's for a TED Talk or a big keynote address, or whether it's even going into a meeting with you have a team of people, right? Why are you having this meeting? Why are we doing this 15-20 minute meeting, or this meeting, this weekly thing that we do? Why are we doing it today? Why does it matter to the people who are going to be giving you their time? And so you get to that if you let them know that from the very beginning. And for you, that starts off with, so tell me what you're looking at. What are you looking for? What matters to you in a home? Maybe don't say that, but right. So you start off that conversation that's about them, and then it does become a conversation.
It's so
Yeah.
interesting. I have a new agent on my team, younger guy, and he shadowed me on an open house this weekend, and it was a bigger house. So we were like, okay, when the people come in, we're gonna have you tour them through the house, right? Because it's a large home. Not traditionally what we do, but it was a good practice for him. And afterwards, he was like, I was so afraid that I was not going to say the right thing about the house, or I was not going to point out the right feature and blah, blah, blah. And I just said to him afterwards, I was like, I don't really care what you say about the house. What you should be doing in this situation is asking them questions about themselves, and listening to what they have to say. And it is really interesting when you talk about listening and like active listening to really hear the person. That's so different than going in with an agenda and just like vomiting out what you think you're supposed to be saying, right? And I think sometimes, especially in a profession like ours, or any kind of sales profession, like when people first start, they just want to get through their pitch, right? Like they just want to get through their pitch, and they don't want people to respond to them because they don't know how to handle the different questions. But also, like to your point, so much of that is confidence in what they're doing. Like Cheryl and I can walk into a listing appointment or a buyer's consultation now and feel very confident and know what we want to say, but not be so formulaic that we can't, like, we can just go in there and be like, yeah, tell me about your house. What do you love about your house? Whatever. And then listen to what they have to say and adjust. And I think that is such an interesting point you bring up.
Yeah. It's a there's a balance between, I have a little thing that I call my, when people are putting their content together, I call it my tightrope story walk strategy.
Okay.
And to you made me just think of that when you were saying that when you go into a room, you go into a meeting, or you do have something, you have an agenda in the sense that there are certain things you need to accomplish. You have an
Right.
objective, what have you. And so you want to stay focused on that. And at the same time, you want to be able to take in what's happening in the room and keep moving forward. The reason I call it that, side note, is when I was getting my Master of Fine Arts in acting, one of the requirements at the end of our 3 years was we had to learn how to walk across a tightrope.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's
Sounds way more
And
fun than the
hilarious.
college I went to.
well, yeah. So
Were you
this was
harnessed? You had to be harnessed, right? Were you harnessed?
well, we weren't like, wasn't strung up between like the Empire State Building and another like high rise or anything like that. It was in a classroom. It was probably maybe 3 feet or so off the ground, just high enough so that you knew if you were going to fall off. But here's the thing. The reason we had to do it was not because the head of our program wanted us to be circus performers or whatever. It's because he believed that that act of stepping onto the tightrope, staying on that tightrope, was a metaphor for how he hoped each of us would leave that program and move through the world. Because here's why: staying on that tightrope requires very little athleticism or grace. What it does require is you to be fully present and in the moment, each step that you take. Because the second that you think about, oh, wait, what was I going to say next? Or, oh, my stomach's growling, or oh, did I say that? Did I mean to say that? You fall off the tightrope. You fall off. So that's internal distractions and also external distractions that can happen to you. But here was the other thing that was most informative of that whole exercise was that if you fell off, you didn't go to the end of the line and wait for your turn. You got right back on it. And his rule was that you had to go one step further than you did before you fell off.
I love it.
And that sense of presence and that sense of really being fully engaged in the room is how we all need to listen as well. Listen to that other person who has that objective. Maybe someone's coming in really hot, as we say, right? They're on fire. They have something they're going to get to. So you can capture that in your imagination and think, okay, this is what's happening here, and take that in and be a better listener and diffuse the situation, right? There's all kinds of just that tightrope thing. I think of that all the time when I'm speaking, when I'm listening, when I'm in these different situations, like, wow, that person is walking into that tightrope and not getting off.
I'm so interested in this. So I listen to a lot of audio presentations, whether it be a webinar, a podcast, an audiobook. Like I don't have a ton of time to sit down and visually read, which is how I do believe I process better by reading than I do by listening, but that's just not the reality of the world we live in right now. And I've been listening to all these audiobooks, and what I have found is if I am not completely present on the tightrope, my brain is over here, over there, and everywhere else thinking about what's for dinner, what do I need to get at the store, what do I need to say to that client. And I have found like when I'm driving and when
Mm,
I play this very stupid game on my phone while I'm listening, I can stay engaged in what I'm listening to and actually be present and hear it. Like I need my brain just needs to be just enough occupied. So I'm wondering if you have any tips in like a
mm,
one-on-one presentation where someone you're trying to get someone like this intake meeting I'm talking about. Like any
mm.
tips on how to stay present in those moments for this all of us with these very busy brains because if I'm not present, if I'm not here listening to you, if I heard my phone buzz and now I'm a little bit distracted, then I missed
Mm.
that whole last sentence that you said, and I'm not going to have that retained for what is going to be an important part of our relationships. Do you have any tangible tips for staying present to stay on the tightrope?
Yes, a couple. The first one is to breathe and to not just breathe, we have to breathe to speak and to be alive, but to remember that you're focusing on your breath. Take a hand, put it on your belly. If you feel your mind going away, going in another direction, if you feel your heart racing, if you're for all of those moments, just take a hand and put it on your belly. And you can do it subtly. I do this with speakers all the time where they're in a situation like, not going to put my, I'm going to look like I'm like catching my breath. No, just take your hand. If you're walking or you're sitting down, you can just put it on your belt, or you can just put it, you can even press on your, one of your legs if you're sitting, as a reminder to send your attention to your breath and recognize that your breath comes from the deepest part of you. The reason why that works is it's very hard to focus on anything else. You still can listen to someone while you're breathing and focusing on your breath, but it's very hard to think about anything else while you're focusing on your breath. I like to say it's kind of like trying to sneeze with your eyes open.
I'm going to have to try that.
Let me know because I
Don't.
haven't found anybody that can do it.
You
It might
can't
be
do
a
it.
thing that like we might hurt ourselves if we try to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's one thing, right? Is to just focus on your breath. The other thing you can do when you're actually in a room talking to someone is those are five senses: touch, taste, see, hear, smell. And if you give yourself that task and that lesson to be aware of like, okay, if I know that might happen to me, I'm going to remember touch, taste, see, hear, smell. So you give yourself that little message before you go into that. If that's a particular moment that you find where you are getting distracted often, give yourself that message before you go in. So what does that mean? That means that touch, like I said, you can like put a hand on your leg and be like, okay, in your internal voice, not that internal critic, but that positive voice that's reminding you how fabulous you are, says, okay, so you're back in the room, you put your hand on your, just kind of, and just take a little bit of a breath. Eye contact, that's a simple thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can always try to notice what color somebody's eyes are, right? I mean, you don't want to like really stare in their eyes, and like that would be really weird and creepy, but just notice, or notice something that they're wearing. Notice, how does the room smell? How does the room look? Oh, you're in this room, 5 days a week, but I never really noticed the color of taupe on that wall, whatever it is. But use your senses to bring you back into the moment. Those are the things you can do for yourself internally. And then the external things that I've talked about is put your attention on the other person. That's also something that I work with people who have a lot of public speaking anxiety, that aren't really going to go do the giant TED talk, but who just feel like they're in a place where they've either gotten a new position in their careers, or they've moved into a new profession where they do need to be talking more customer facing, and it's not easy for everyone. So that very simple thing of just notice what the color somebody's eyes are, or what actors do all the time. The best acting scenes you've seen, the best comedies, the best dramas, are when both of those people are deeply engaged in what's happening between them, right? It's not just one person out there yakking away. Asking good questions. It's saying, hey, if they tell you where they're from, oh my goodness, tell me more about that. Or you're interested in such and such kind of home. Tell me why that's so interesting to you. Take whatever they have said and use their language to ask another question, rather than thinking, oh, what am I going to say? How am I going to ask a good question? Just use what they give you. That's one of the great rules for improv, too. Just use what you've been given. Don't feel like you have to come up with something.
I love that
Very
because
helpful.
yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's been so many conversations that I've had with people where it's like I can see them just waiting to ask whatever pre planned question they had for me was. And I'm like, I'm not even sure you heard what I said there. Like, and it's very obvious too. Like it's obvious as the person on the other side. So when you talked about rehearsing or role playing or like doing these things over and over again, I think doesn't get enough credit. For me, it was like, I hate it. I hate practicing. I hate doing role playing. I hate doing that stuff. It feels awkward to me. But my business partner she really needed that. So we would do it all the time. And the more we did it, it was like fine. And it like got me out of my ness of doing it. But then when you walk into a room, you feel more comfortable, right? I guess that's the whole thing, that you can be present.
It is. And those sorts of like the role playing thing in business, you're not the only one. Like I was, whenever like people always want to like, are we going to do role playing? Are we going to do trust falls? And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. But I mean, no, in certain circumstances, right? You have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to,
Yeah.
when you're training and all of that stuff. But what I ask people to do too is to practice that, whatever the skill is, because it's not always, as you said in the example you were giving, where you were taking your younger person through the house, it's not what you're saying,
Right.
it's how you're saying it.
Yeah.
So practice that way of being as you step into that, in when you go to the grocery store, when you get your gas, when some,
Mm.
I mean, we don't pump our own gas here in New Jersey, but when you're talking to the gas station person, or when you go to say hi to the person who's at the front desk, talk to that person in the same way that you would to a client.
I love it.
Right. So you're practicing those sorts of skills in the circumstances that are maybe less lower stakes.
I'd like to make a recommendation of where you can kind of see exactly what you're talking about play out. I've been watching couples therapy with Orna, whatever her last name is. Has anybody seen this? It's on Showtime.
Mm-mm.
She's a therapist and she's sitting down with couples, and you get to go through their whole therapy sessions with them, and it's fascinating. But she is very much like, tell me more about this thing. It's not that she doesn't still insert her thoughts and her opinions, because she does. And I
Mhm,
think that in a business climate, that's an important thing. We do need to still deliver our expertise and our knowledge, but
mhm,
it's very directed towards specific what they said to get there. And then she dives deeper constantly, like to get them to say it in a different way so you can understand it in a different way. And she just continues. So if you would like some examples of how to see this play out, I recommend couples therapy on Showtime. We're not sponsored yet, but I'm sure Showtime will be calling me
Ah,
any
that
minute
was good. That was really
for
good. I love it.
sponsorship.
But
Yeah.
you know
So
what?
I
You
just
know what?
highly recommend it.
You shared another good tip within everything you just said there, and that is that this way, this stepping fully and completely to feel present and authentic, it doesn't just happen like that. It happens over time. You have to practice it. And one of the fun things that I like to do with people initially is I help them kind of go back and take a little view of the different people in their life that have been meaningful. If it's someone from, if it's a spouse, if it's a good friend, if it's a sibling, if it's a parent, if it's, you look at a boss, you look at a coworker, and let's talk about it's a long exercise, but it delivers so much value because what that does is it gets you to realize that all of those qualities are in you. All of those things that other people that know you well or in different capacities kind of come together, right? And so when you have these ways that you have a boss and you have a colleague and you have a parent, you have a spouse, whatever it is, that those often can feel very disconnected. But once we take a moment and breathe, I'll take my own advice here, and start to recognize that those we may be a little slightly different in how we interact in those situations, but ultimately those qualities inform who we are. So you want to take that authenticity of those unique things about who you are and how you move through the world and take them into your work life as much as you feel comfortable. And then you layer on the next thing. So your young new client, so your young new
Agent.
colleague,
Yep. Yep.
agent, you're not agent, thank you, is going to bring their own authenticity, their
Yep.
own qualities, all of that. And as they get more comfortable asking questions and walking around the house and having those conversations, it's all going to come together, just like actors do when we step into a new role. We don't forget who we are, then we'd be really kooky and nutty, right? But we bring all of that stuff with us. And one of the rules of improv is yes, and we layer on those qualities, those ways of speaking, those ways of being that are required of that new role that we're stepping into. So it all kind of comes together over time. It doesn't happen overnight. And we have to be easy with ourselves when it doesn't happen as quickly as we want it to.
Amazing. Julie, can you tell us a little bit about like who, if somebody wanted to work with you, like who do you work with? We touched a little bit on it in your bio, but is it businesses? Is it individuals? Is it groups? Who's your ideal client, Julie?
You're going to throw it back at me, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all good. It's all good. I got to be ready to talk about that stuff. So my ideal client is really what the core of what I do is I help make public speaking in presentations, in meetings, and in conversations easier with techniques and tools from the stage, with how you come to that, what you say, and how you say it. If I work sometimes with people who have deep public speaking fear and people who are like, wow, I love the stage, but are all over the map when it comes to actually presenting. So, to your point, I like to say that I work with CEOs and their teams
Okay.
to help them come together. It might be working with corporate teams for their messaging, because very often we have like there's remote teams. I love to be in person, but I do work remotely too. Where you have teams that are spread out all over the country, sometimes all over the world. How do we get everybody together so that we're connected and there's no kooky, wacky theater games that I make people do or anything like that? But it's really about helping people find that space where they can come into the room and feel they can bring as much of their authenticity as they're comfortable with. And when you do that, right, you give permission for the rest of the people on the team to do the same. So part of it is that connection part when I'm working with teams. The other part of it is directly what is your messaging? What's unique about your business? And are we all on the same page in how we're going to talk, what we're going to say about our business, how we differentiate ourselves from our competitors, and what's the messaging going to be? So that's with teams. I've already talked about how I work with, if you're doing keynotes and speaking engage and all of that. That I absolutely love. And I also do keynotes and guest speaking events myself with corporations and colleges and universities and all of that. Because we do have a younger group of folks who not everybody's really comfortable talking in person
Yeah.
with our digital world that we're in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's that, and that's really what it is. It's one-on-one. It's with corporate events and guest speaking, and then with teams. And my information's all. I have a big button on my website that says, connect with us. Anyone who is listening to a podcast, what we'll say, just tell me on the little note thing where it says, "How did you hear about me?" Just tell me getting it right, got it right, or wait, I messed it up,
That's
doing it
okay.
right.
Doing it
With the
right. Yep.
doing it
We're
right,
doing
or
this
just
right.
right,
Yep. Yep.
the right one.
Yeah,
You could put that in
exactly.
the thing, because I really like to, when people have kind of already understand kind of what I do and how I do it, and they've given me some of their energy already. I like to give people little goodies and gifts or checklists of how to be more confident on camera, or how to get rid of filler words or things like that. So yeah.
I love it. Love it.
So where can people find you if they are your ideal client, they're your audience avatar, where are we going to send people?
My website, centerstageconnections.com. There's a big button there that says just click on that, and you can put your information in there, and we can schedule a complimentary 20-minute call consultations. Your first one is always when we see if we're a good fit, and then we can move forward. And I'm also going to send you all a couple little goodies you can put in your show notes for some little thank yous for people being here too.
So
Thank you so
thank you so
much.
much.
I'm just
This has been
sitting here
great.
dreaming about how I could have you come and sit down with our team and like nail our listing presentation if you would.
Yes.
Deliver our value proposition and get everybody on the same
Mhm.
page. I just see the value of that from a team perspective
Yes,
hugely. So
that's my sweet spot, working with teams. I would love that.
thank you, Julie, so much for being here. And we so appreciate all of the information and your vulnerability, sharing what you went through growing up. And we can't wait to see more of you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. You guys have a great day.
Thanks,
You
Julie.
too. See you next time.
That's a wrap. Thank you for joining us on this journey of laughter, life, and growth.
And remember, you're not alone on this path to success. We're right here with you every step of the way.
Please remember to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's conversation, we'd be thrilled if you would leave us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback means the world to us.
And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family, and anyone who could use a good laugh and some practical insight into navigating the challenges and triumphs of our minds, body, soul, and business.
Remember, we're doing this right.